Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to the listening public, the wonderful people here on the island of Nevis, those on our sister island of St. Kitts, those who are listening throughout the Caribbean Sea. Good evening to our friends and family in the United States and Canada, those in the United Kingdom. In fact, wherever you are, good evening. My name is Mark Brantley, Premier of Nevis and host of this show, On the Mark. And we are here every Wednesday from 8 to 10 with matters that we think are of some interest to the community. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a sad time in our island and in our country. On Saturday last, we all woke to the tragic and unexpected and sudden news that the Honorable Vance Winkworth Amory, former Premier of Nevis, had passed away in the United Kingdom. I believe that many of us were in shock then. Some of us continue to be in shock even now. Last night, I had the opportunity to come back to Let's Talk, a program hosted by Everett Weber Herbert, a program where I got my start in radio, and we spent a little time together paying tribute to the Honorable Vance Amory. I should tell you that if we were to have a lifetime of shows, it would still be difficult to capture the full measure of the man who was Vance Amory. Tonight, we will dedicate this show, On the Mark, for the full 2 hours to the memory of Vance Amory, sharing our own memories of him, but also when we open the phones, asking you, the public, to feel free to call in, and we hope that we can, through our words and through our shared memories and through the discussion this evening, memorialize him in a significant way. He has gone, and we must now speak about what he did whilst he was here on earth with us, and whilst he walked amongst us, and the contribution that he would have made. Tonight I have with me the Deputy Premier of Nevis, the Honourable Alexis Jeffers. I also anticipate that we will, over the course of the evening, have calls from persons who have worked with Vance Amory in government, persons who would have known him well, and persons who can speak eloquently to who he was and the contribution that he would have made and the impact that he would have had on them. I therefore say welcome to the Honourable Alexis Jeffers, the Deputy Premier of Nevis and Deputy Leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement, a party that Vance Amory was the principal founder of. Alexis, good night.
Yes.
And welcome to On the Mark.
Good night, Premier Brantley, and good night to the listening and viewing public, of course, and all those who are following this program and continue to follow us from week to week over the last almost 15 years thereabout. And it's good to be in the company of you, Premier Brantley, and all who are listening and viewing. And indeed, you started just as I expected you to do so, and that is to touch on the issue or the matter that is at hand these days, and that is the passing of the Honourable Vance Amory. You're correct when you said that it has left many of us in shock. Even to this moment, I am still in a state of disbelief, even though it is a fact. I will say to you, Premier Brantley, and to the entire listening and viewing public, that the passing of Mr. Amory certainly has brought into focus the fragility of life, the human life. And it is even more obvious now to me that today you can be here and tomorrow you're gone, or this minute you're here, this minute you're gone. And so we live within that space of one breath to another. And you can breathe one breath now, and the next one you're no longer here with us. And that's why it's always good to live a life that is one that encompasses your family, your friends, and all of the good things that one would want to enjoy while they're alive. And I'm sure Vance Amory, if he were to speak this evening, would say that he would have lived a life which was consistent with what I just said in terms of looking out for family, looking out for country, looking out for everybody, and making sure that he would have done his duty, a tour of duty here on earth. Premier Brantley, this evening I believe we were thinking about talking about other things, and this is one of those situations that we never thought of last week, Wednesday, for example, or even up until Friday evening when many of us went to bed. But we got up to the reality that we are facing at this time. And indeed, tonight, as you said, we'll want to focus on the good things of the man, Vance Amory, the leader that we knew him to be, the team player, the patriot, and one who certainly has some qualities, or had some qualities, that all of us can emulate and live by them day after day. I can speak of many as we go along, but I will want to say at this point in time, my heart is heavy, of course, yes, and I want to publicly extend my profound condolences to the entire family of the Honorable Vance Amory, his wife, Vernie Amory, Meredith, his sister, his 2 daughters, brothers, sisters, cousins, and Vance had many, many cousins. As a matter of fact, the whole of St. Kitts Nevis was a family to, or was a family to the Honorable Vance Amory, because he called everyone cousin. I believe I was his cousin as well too. He never told me that, but I believe I can count myself in that bracket of being a cousin. But such was Vance's impact here on the island of Nevis, in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and beyond that, throughout the entire Caribbean and beyond, because many of our people live in various parts of the world and know of the impact of Vance Amory and the influence he would have had on their life. And that is why we pay respect this evening. And I just want to wrap up by saying, may his soul rest in eternal peace.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I too join you, as I have done publicly and I continue to do, to extend condolences to the family of the Honorable Vance Amory, and obviously to all of us, because the thing about somebody like Vance Amory, he has his family in terms of his biological family, but the truth be told, that he belongs to Nevis and he belongs to the wider Federation. He would have contributed in so many ways, whether it is in the church, where he was a lay preacher in the Anglican Church, whether it was in cricket, or in athletics, or in football. He would have contributed in terms of the civil service. He was a teacher, he was a principal, he was an educator, he was a permanent secretary, he was a civil servant for many years. And so there were so many different facets to Vance Amory. And of course, he would have been principal in forming the Concerned Citizens Movement, which at the time took the fight to the Nevis Reformation Party and would have taken on a giant of the day in the Honorable, of course, Simeon Daniel, who was then perhaps the biggest name here in St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of the politics of the day, now a national hero. So the truth is that Vance Amory was somebody who took on big challenges, he took on big tasks. And the issue for us, Alexis, is to really look at him as we pay tribute to him in terms of the contribution that he would have made, because ultimately that is what we must be remembered by. Mm-hmm. We must be remembered by the contribution that we would have made and the service that we gave to others. I like the point that you make about the fleeting nature of life, because I realize that the former Premier was only perhaps 2.5 weeks prior in Belize leading a delegation there, and he came back to St. Kitts and Nevis, left and went to the UK, and it almost seems in the twinkling of an eye we got the news that he had gone. And so, you know, they used to say, as you said, here today, gone tomorrow. It's now here 1 minute, gone the next. Mm-hmm. And it really forces us to contemplate our own lives, what it is we're doing, how we can do better, what we can do better, and to ensure that each of us, because all of us have spheres of influence, whether it's in our family, in our community, in our church, in our business place, in our workplaces, whatever we do, that we leave that legacy, that we impact people in a positive way. And I have always said that I think the best tribute that anyone can give is for others to say of you, mm-hmm, that you were here and that you made a positive contribution. Because all of us, Alexis, know that we are only here but for a while. Mm-hmm. In fact, if the scriptures hold true, we've only been promised 70. So somebody like me is well now on the final furlong, mm-hmm, insofar as that
17 years to go.
Exactly. So the reality is, I think that we know this going in. Mm-hmm. We understand from the moment we are born, we start to die. And therefore, to me, that certain knowledge should compel us, mm-hmm, to function in a certain way, to live our lives in a certain way, and to do the best that we can by others. And so I think that at the end of the day, the historians will be the one to judge. Vance Amory has only just passed away, but certainly the accolades have been pouring in. I can tell you that from my own vantage point as Premier, and of course the person who took over from him, he was the immediate predecessor, that I have had messages coming in from across the region, in fact, from across the world. In fact, just today, a renowned singer reached out to me to ask if she would be given the honor, could be given the honor of performing at his service, his funeral service, his homegoing service. We do not yet have details, I want to say to the public, of when that service will be. The last information that we had was that certain protocols and arrangements were still being made to get the body, the remains of the Honorable Vance Emery back to Nevis, and it is only at that point that we can start to talk about an applicable date. But certainly the purpose tonight, Alexis, is for us to reflect with the public, with colleagues whom I hope will call in, about Vance, his legacy, what he meant to all of us. You and I would have sat in a cabinet with him since 2013 in the Nevis Island administration, where he functioned as the Premier and the Minister with various portfolios. But we would have really been around him in terms of the party since around about 2006, when the party had lost, the CCM party had lost office to the NRP, and you and I were both recruited into the party as part of the rebuilding mechanism. And of course, here we are, from 2006 until now, some 16 years on.
Right.
And we're still here, in a very real sense, standing on the foundation that people like Vance Emery and others, Malcolm Gishard and others, would have built. And so we have much to be thankful for. In fact, I said last night that were it not for Vance Emery, I am not sure that I would even have been in politics at all, because my path for my life in terms of my own head was a different path. I love the law, I still do. I was trained as a lawyer. I felt I was fairly good at it. I had a good record as a lawyer. I was doing work all across the region. In fact, I was doing work in far-flung places like Singapore, where I recall I went and did legal work there. I really, Alexis, had intended to try and become a Queen's Counsel and ultimately to try and become a judge. That was my life's path. And he, I recall, would have come to my home together with his wife, Vernie, and he would have come and persuaded me to join after, of course, the CCM had lost office. And I believe you and I have reflected privately time and time again that very few people come into a party in opposition. It's a difficult place to be because, of course, you do not have access to any of the resources that one would normally associate with being in government. And so you and I would have had that journey with him, and you know, we lived the struggle. We understood all that we went through, whether it was fighting a by-election in 2007, dealing as a party with the sudden passing of Malcolm Gishard in 2007, you know, as you recall, me, and I mean just almost less than a year, or just about a year after getting involved in politics, being forced to contest, I shouldn't say forced, being required or called upon to contest that by-election for the first time, coming up against Hensley Daniel, who was a deputy premier, and of course in a seat number 9, which is St. John's and St. Paul's, both of which were held at the local level by the NRP. It was to some extent seen by many as an impossible undertaking just a year after the CCM had lost the NIA. But then not only that, going on to the election of 2010, the federal election, contesting that, being able to win there again in that particular constituency. But again, under the leadership of Vance, you had contested, you were unsuccessful then. We went back in 2011. This was your turn now to be successful in St. James at the local level. I was unsuccessful due to the fox in the cox box, as we like to say, and it has been memorialized in Kaiso. And then, of course, the historic battle in the court, the marches to Charlestown, the swearing in of the NRP after the stolen 2011 election, and the near miss that we had in town, when if we had different leadership to Vance Emery, we might have had a problem in Charlestown in terms of chaos reigning there. We move forward and we think about the elections of 2013, after the court had ruled both at the High Court and Court of Appeal level, and moving again. We think about, if we move backwards, Vance and the secession call and calling for secession. I mean, there are so many facets to this, and to who the man was and what he was involved in. And I think in our recent memory, Certainly I believe, I would say in the last 50 years, at least, Vance Amy would have stood tall on the stage here on the island of Nevis and the wider Federation in different ways.
Sure. Well, you have certainly laid it out, Premier Brantley. But let me go back a little further, because I've known of Vance for many years. At least those who would have grown up in the Brooklyn area and went to St. James Anglican Church would know that Vance would have spent some time there when Father Blant was the priest in charge of St. James Anglican Church. So I knew Vance for many years, but in terms of my close interaction with him, of course, it came into being when I got into active politics. But if I were to backtrack, you mentioned earlier that Vance was a teacher, head teacher, banker, and permanent secretary, and he worked his way up to the leadership of this island. And of course he was in the federal parliament as well. But you know, with the politics of the day, I can recall a certain gentleman from the NRP would have said, well, he had some negative things to say about Vance. I'm calling him a failure. And I said to myself, as a young man coming up, well, how can one be viewed as a failure when he left from being a teacher to a head teacher, then to a banker, managing the National Bank here for I think 3 years, left there and became a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, left and formed his party, and then became the leader of Nevis. So it means you're heading up the ladder, the rungs of leadership and the rungs of success. And he was termed a failure. And that is why I said to myself as a young man, something has to be wrong with that type of thinking. When I look at Vance Amri, I can see success all around. And I say that to say this: you laid out his exploits in politics, and when I actually think back to at least when the party was formed, to the point where in 1992 I was right down there at Cedar Trees in front of Swanee's bargain center in that area when the celebrations were held upon the winning of the local election then in 1992. I believe it was June of 1992, and that's when he became a premier. And one can follow his exploits over the 14 years in government, meaning based on what was known then in terms of the fiscal situation of the island of Nevis. Indeed, Vance would have played a pivotal role in bringing about the transformation of the island of Nevis over those 14 years, with the establishment, of course, of NEVLEC, the establishment of the Nevis Solid Waste, and also procurement of new generator and all sorts of things you can think about. Indeed, I can say to you, Premier Brantley, speaking about the fiscal situation of Nevis, Vance Amri, of course, you know, he was a banker. Persons was saying back then and still can say now that he was a frugal person in a good way, in the sense that he didn't waste public funds. And that is why, if I were to skip to 2013, when we got into government, you remember he insisted that we'll all take a 10% pay cut. Many of us didn't know what the salary was then. But we had to come on board because he had an idea what we would have met in 2013. And when we got into government, of course, you could have seen the anguish on his face when he realized how terrible the fiscal situation of Nevis was then. At least one can recall when he left government, it was what, $29 million overdraft he left behind, and when we came back into government in 2013, that was already run up to $65 million, turned into a loan, and then we were back up to $65 million again. And those are the type of fiscal situation that he would have met then compared to what he left. And that is why I believe that Vance could be seen as a financial guru in the way he would have managed the affairs of Nevis. And he left some examples for all of us to follow, and that is why even in your case, one can give you some commendation with the way that you have sought to manage the affairs of Nevis through all of the difficult times we have had over the last 2 years with this pandemic. But if I were to backtrack, we'll be backtracking and coming forward a lot this evening, Brantley, because there's so many things one can say. As a matter of fact, as I sit here this evening, I recall my first appearance on the mark in August of 2006 was with the Honorable Vance Amri. And he said he was hosting the program that night, and I believe we all got together and said, no, let Alexis host the program and you'll be the guest on the program. And that is how I got my feet wet on talk radio, so to speak. So Vance was with me then. And if I were to go back to 2003, I think I mentioned to you how I got introduced to Vance politically. I will not go into all of the details when it comes to that, but I recall being taken to the Honorable Vance Samri in May of 2003. I would have come back to Nevis, I believe, on the 7th of May 2003. And within a week, I was taken to Vance Samri, and I was presented to Vance as the next person to represent St. James when Nurse Jane Harris would have called it a day. Not a minute before, but once she decided that she was done with active politics, then this is the man. Okay. And I remember a conversation with the Premier at that time, shortly after that, and he gave me some ideas as to what to do. Go out in the community, play your sports, mix with your people, go to church, get involved, and look out for people. And that is what I did, and those advice that he was given then is still with me up until today. And I think that is how Vance would have lived his life. And so he imparted that to myself, and I'm sure he did that with you and many others who he would have interacted with. So since 2003, politically I've been walking beside Vance Samri. I never went up his step to ask him for anything because it was not my type of thing either. But at least I would have been elected to the executive in 2006, January of 2006. He was the leader then, of course. Shortly after, in July, the government was lost. And I recall the morning after the election, we were down in Pinnies in a building. And everyone was sitting around the table who was on the executive then, including all of the former ministers. And everyone was quiet. I was the youngest among the bunch. And I sat there, and after about 5 or 6 minutes of silence, I said, guys, listen, we can win back this government in 5 years. And that was my naivety come into play, because I didn't know anything about politics as such then. But anyway, I think the ice was broken, and everyone started talking and looked at what went wrong and what can be done in the future. And then the whole idea was, let's get back on the road, because something was done in that election.
Of course.
That was not challenged, but we know something went wrong. And even today, people are talking about the things that they did in 2006, how they moved persons from St. Kitts, dropped them all behind here by the conch shell and other parts, and the in St. Kitts calling up and say, well, 10 coming over on the next boat, 20 coming at 11 o'clock, that kind of thing, right? So the attempt was made then, and it was successful, to steal an election from the people of Nevis and gave them a government that really created havoc here on the island of Nevis. Nevis was on an upward trajectory back in 2006. Things were good fiscally, and otherwise the infrastructure was being worked on, and the Long Point Pier was being built, or was already built. Charlestown waterfront, one of the best in the region, was refurbished or rebuilt, however you want to put it. And then the realignment of the traffic and so forth in Charlestown. Roads were built throughout the island of Nevis. The schools were in good shape. Everything was working well at that time under his leadership. But something went wrong at the polls that year. And that is what was corrected after we had that confirmation process in 2008. But then again, it was tried again under his leadership. But you were there at the time, Brantley, and you decided, we can't live with that anymore. And that is why we have a CCM administration at this time. But I want to say that through it all, Vance Samri have really imparted some principles to all of us. Being decent, being honest, and being transparent and forthright in what your dealings are. And I believe all of those principles were the hallmark of his leadership, and they have been passed on to all of us. And that is why you can boast today that no one can point a finger at any one of your ministers in government, because of the teachings that we would have garnered and gotten from the Honorable Vance Samri. And if we were to walk in that particular pathway, I think we'll be fine as a people and as a government.
Alexis, I want to just pick up where you left off, because I think that aspect of the former Premier, the Honorable Vance Samri, and that those lessons that would have been passed on to us, to me as the now Premier, I think that not enough is said. Politics is a bruising and difficult undertaking. It is one of the most difficult jobs perhaps because you're in the business of trying to please people, when we understand that people are difficult to please. And I said to somebody today, this morning in fact, they said that they were engaged in a discussion, and that a division said to them that I was being greedy by seeking to say that Nevis was not getting the agreed share of certain proceeds that had been promised to Nevis. And she said to the interviewer, "Oh, why are you attacking somebody who's standing up for Nevis? Oh, he being greedy because we never used to get nothing." That was the thing. And she turned to me and she said, "Why do you think people..." And I said to her simply, "They crucified Jesus, who was blameless, who came to save us, and yet he was killed. So who am I?" The truth is that politics is a very difficult business. Bruising, people say things about you that are untrue. People say things about you that are hurtful. People say things about you that you yourself don't know anything about. But the one constant that we hear about politics and politicians, Alexis, is that we are corrupt. It's an easy allegation. The minute you mention politics, people say, "Oh, them thief, them bad, them corrupt." That is sort of par for the course. And I believe that we need to talk about it more. Because under the leadership of Van Samry, certainly since we have been there since 2013, there's never been any whiff of scandal or any allegations.
Right.
You moved to 2017 when I became Premier, and it is something that I am eternally grateful to you and to my colleagues in the cabinet, because nobody has been able to come and say. And in an island this size, if things are happening, it will be hard to hide.
Of course.
You yourself have been there at Nevis Housing and Land Development Corporation, and you've made the point, and I think it's worthy of being made, that that corporation was always embroiled in some allegations. When anybody last hear? The only thing they hear about NHLDC now is you're building house.
Right.
And I think that we must take that back to basic grounding principles. And Van Samry, I think, led in such a way when he was in the cabinet that all of us knew, listen, you couldn't engage in no kind of nonsense, That was not going to be tolerated. And that discipline has been passed down to the point where we now are clearly very disciplined in terms of our own approach. Yes. And I think that, as I said, sometimes goes, people don't pay it enough credit and talk about it enough, because of all the things that have been alleged about his government, led by him as my predecessor, and now my government, led by me at this point in time. No one has ever raised any specter that you or I or anybody in the cabinet is involved in anything untoward. And I believe that sometimes when you talk about legacy, people look for buildings and roads and things like that, and those are important. But also how we conduct ourselves in office,
public trust,
is equally important.
Yes, and as you mentioned all that, Premier Brantley, I am now thinking about, we have these jingles when we are campaigning, and you have yours, I have mine. But Van Samry had this song that he would have adopted as his theme song, Rashati I. I don't know if you know the song. Do you know? I know you're not a Calypso fan, but Rashati, who God bless, no man curse. And I think the first couple of lines says what the workers of iniquity digging a pit for me, and they're waiting for me to fall in. But it's a lovely song, and it is befitting of Van Samry in terms of how he would have lived his life and the principles that you just spoke about. And I believe that we can all say that we are better off today as a result of the influences of the Honorable Van Samry. And indeed, you speak about corruption in government, because that's a word that is always bandied about and thrown around. It's easy to say, they're corrupt, or whatever the case might be. But the facts would prove differently when it's all said and done, when it comes to this administration and those that have been a part of with the Honorable Van Samry as the leader. And so we would have preached one thing outside of government, meaning we exposed the NRP for the wrongs that they were doing.
And documented.
And documented it. And it would have been hypocritical of us to come into government and do exactly what they did, or do things consistent with what they did, if you want to put it that way. And so I believe that we have surely taken a path that the people of Nevis, because these are public, we're dealing with the public funds, public trust. And those are the things that I believe this party holds dearly. And the principles of the party really are embodied in how we operate and what we do. And that is why I'm so happy that you, I'm sure, is equally happy as well that we would have joined this party, because there were options. The option of the NRP in government, for example, in 2006, one might have things, well, let's jump on board with the NRP, then in government, let's ride it, the gravy train. But no, the two parties were all divisions, yes. But when you look at the operations of both parties, stemming from the leadership come down, you see there are two different parties, two different ideals, and two different agendas in terms of how we operate.
Absolutely.
And that is why I am so glad that I would have chosen to fight the fight in opposition. It wasn't easy. It was not easy, because you said you were a corporate lawyer, an international lawyer, and have gone to Singapore, those places. I was a poolman of the day, and I was a proud poolman too. And I can still consider myself to be a poolman, because that business was started by myself in 1990. My uncle is there running that operation now, but he wasn't here when it started, so at least I know how to start something and how to press on in the face of adversities and
how to hire people and make
and
a
how
payroll.
to make a payroll
Yes.
on a weekend. So
Exactly.
at least that is an exploit that I would always look back on, and that is why Van Sam himself was a businessman too. Because even in opposition, he would have pursued business, and I would want to think he was successful at it, but he didn't sit around and loaf around and wait for anything from government, as some persons are doing these days, sitting around just for a 5-year cycle to come to get into government and reap a bountiful harvest as a result. But how you define yourself is what you do when things are difficult, whether you're able to go out there and pursue business, to employ people, and demonstrate to the general public here in Nevis that you're capable of pursuing these particular ventures. But if you're just sitting and waiting for a 5-year cycle, it says a whole lot about you as well. You're not ready for the stage that Van Samry would have certainly danced on, for sure.
Well, you make a good point, because we, and I've said it in a different context over and over, that you hear some people, for example, jumping up, talking about jobs and job creation and not enough jobs, and you look at them and you say, but you're running for office and you're talking about jobs. Have you ever hired one person in your lifetime? Like you say, you started something, you're able to you know what it's like to pay people. Have you ever? So when you're complaining about a problem, it's like saying your neighbor is hungry and you come on radio to complain. Have you ever fed your neighbor? They have done, in many cases, absolutely nothing. There are some of them who would have left office in 2013 when we corrected course here on the island of Nevis, and I don't know they've held a job since then. Because, like you say, it's a waiting on a cycle. Look at Vance Emery. Even out of office, Vance would have had his business. He would have been engaged, and you know, there's certain, let's face it, a certain level of respectability that the gentleman had. And somebody put it to me interestingly. They said, you know what, even people who didn't support Vance respected him. And that says a lot. And I think that what sometimes the opposition of the day then miscalculated on, they thought by going on radio and thing and cussing Vance, they call him Uncle Vance, and being disrespectful and seeking to be disrespectful to him, they didn't realize they were losing support. Because people out there, even those who did not support politically, were still respected, respectful, of him, and certainly who he was. Alexis, this is 25 minutes to the hour.
Wow.
Let me open the lines, because you and I can have this conversation all night. The numbers to call if you want to be a part of the show: 869-469-1616 and 869-469-1700. We are hopeful, ladies and gentlemen, that you can use the opportunity to call in, whether you're members of the Concerned Citizens Movement cabinet of the party, or you're just somebody who's a supporter, or you are an Envision at home or abroad, or you are somebody from the Federation, or indeed, if you're somebody out there regionally and internationally who would have been impacted by Vance Emery. He would have gone to UWI and was a shining star there. He would have played cricket for Nevis and for the Combined Islands. He was a shining star there. He would have been a banker. He would have been an educator. He would have been an athlete, a star athlete. In fact, one time he told me that he used to be able to run 100 meters in just over 10 seconds. And you have to reflect again, back in that era, running 100 meters just over 10 seconds with no equipment, no proper training, and you sometimes wonder if people like him had the opportunity, what could have happened? Because I see people even today who go Olympics and things still running that kind of time. You know, so you really have to look and think. And I remember somebody mentioned to me that when the Honorable Vance Emery, as a schoolboy, went to St. Kitts, to the grammar school, because they had to go over there for sixth form back in the day. And he said that, you know, as Kittitians back then, some of them had this attitude that Nivisians were somehow coming from some backward place. So he said, you know, they used to look at him and the way he walked and the way he conducted himself, and they used to almost want to suggest that they're laughing at this Nevis boy who come down. He said when sports they roll around and Vance Emery got on the track, he said, man, he lick up everybody, and he said he moved now from a quiet, unassuming fella to the most popular fella down there, because he was now a star athlete. And I think from then, I mean, I hear people reflect, you know, you go to Barbados, people reflect, you go to Jamaica, wherever you go, the gentleman has impacted so many. Is there anybody holding on the line? The numbers to call are 869-469-1616 and 869-469-1700. Let's go to the phones. We're taking tributes to the Honorable Vance Emery. Good evening.
A pleasant good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'd like to extend my sympathy to the family of Vance Emery. I came across him so many years ago, and for some reason, when he see me, he used to call me Reverend. I don't know the reason why. I never asked, but he was really a humble individual, and I used to respect him because he owned his respect, how he deal with people. I want to extend my sympathy to his family. Take care.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I like that. He earned his respect. He didn't demand it. It wasn't thrust on him. He earned it. And I think that that's important. We're taking your calls for you out there who would want to pay tribute to the Honorable Vance Emery. We're using the show this evening to pay tribute to him on his passing. We were notified on Saturday last that he had passed suddenly in the United Kingdom. And certainly we thought it appropriate that we use this opportunity to pay tribute to him. So let's go back to the telephones and say good evening. You're on the mark. Hello.
Hey, Mr. Brantley, how you doing?
I'm all right.
This is the Red Cap, man. Your partner, man. Who'll be carrying in the stuff. You know, I work for you and Mr. Emery over the years, you know?
Yes, brother.
Right? And he was a good man. He was a real good man, actually. He's a man you could speak with. And you're never too low to speak with him. You always will have a conversation with him. And he always treats you like, you know, he treats people really nice. He was a person, he's not a lot of he's a person just says very little words. But he was real powerful, you know. I know you, Mac, you know, from the airport.
Yes.
And I know Vance Emery, and you guys actually just continue to work from Vance Emery. I think you will do it. You're done doing a good job at that, so I just want to say all the best, and my sympathy goes out to his family. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, brother, and thank you for that contribution. We continue to take calls. Ladies and gentlemen, this is On the Mark. I'm here this evening as the host, Mark Brantley, and I have with me the Deputy Premier of Nevis, the Honorable Alexis Jeffers, and Deputy Leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement, a party that the Honorable Vance Emery would have been the principal founder and leader for over 30 years. In fact, he only relinquished the leadership of that party. I believe it was 2017 when I became the leader. And something that is not often talked about, Alexis, but which I want to get back to, is the succession that was put in place. Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening, Mr. Bradley, and good evening, Mr. Jeffers.
Good evening to you.
Yeah, I must express my sympathies to the people of Nevis, and first of all to his family, and to the people of Nevis, and to CCM, and both of you in particular, as close associates of Mr. Emery. You spoke about school in Basti, I think, if you went to the grammar school.
Yes.
I was there in 1966, you know, these were the age of us old people, you know. Himself and Parry, I spent a year with them in sixth form, because I was seconded out of school to work with Cable and Wireless. They had made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. But himself and Joseph Parry were in sixth form with the rest of us. And these guys were like twins. I'm surprised that they ended up on opposite ends of the political spectrum. But we saw one, you saw the other. I don't know if they were shy of we Kittitians or what, but they left school together, they came back to school together, at break they were together. They were inseparable. So I don't know what might have broke them apart later on in life, but I did have some good memories of both of them. They were both affable people. We laughed a bit in sixth form and that kind of thing. And Vance and I continued to communicate up until recently. As a minister he was Minister of Labour, I think, here, yes, in the federal government under Team Unity. And we always spoke about all sorts of things. And they say we reminisced of the old days in St. Kitts Nevis Grammar School. But very interesting program. I will continue to listen because I'm learning a lot from my old partner, Vance. Have a good evening.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think I recognize the voice, and thank you for your contribution. Vance would have made certainly an impact. He would have made an impact everywhere he went. When I studied in Barbados, I went to Barbados, I recall it was around 1989 to study law. And the people there, once they heard I was from Nevis, the first reference was Vance Ambry. They knew him there. He would have been known through cricket circles all around. He would have been known in St. Kitts at the grammar school as an athlete. He would have been known here in Nevis in so many different ways. And, you know, when we think about it, he did not really live that long a life. I mean, 72 is still relatively young as persons go, but yet he accomplished and did so much. And rose to the top in so many different ways. You spoke about him being a teacher, then the principal, then the permanent secretary, then the premier. You know, there was a constant, it seems, progression in terms of his life. Do we have somebody holding? Let's go back to the phones. Good
Hello?
evening, you're on the mark.
Hello?
You are on the mark.
Okay. This is Brantley. Listening?
Yes, go ahead,
This
please.
is Major Jones. What I want to say, listen me quite slowly. I want you to accept my feeling honestly, to get a more realistic picture of Honorable Vance Emery, the magical qualities of the man. Sometimes I wonder why God made us with such enormous capacity for pleasure. And as a commission officer, I could imagine whenever I've been met with Mr. Emery, he always pay me compliments. Whenever I come to Nevis with the soldiers, he there to make sure that we have very comfortable food, everything. And he'll be sadly missed by me. I do hope I'll get a chance to come across to the funeral. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It is quarter to the hour. Again, we are having a special edition of On the Mark this evening and paying tribute to a great man, a great Nevisian, a great citizen, a great son of the soil, a great person, the Honorable Vance Winkworth Emery. Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the
calling
mark.
to give my sympathy to the Emery family of Vance Winkworth Emery. This is Cutie. He teach me in school, and I know sometimes you hear me call him Amo. Latin, he used to teach me Latin in school. And then Amo made love, Amo Bus made I love, and the other one was you love, she love. That's why we all used to communicate when I call in on the radio station to talk to him. So may they all family blessed and have good time. May God continue to bless him and bless the family. Good night.
Thank you very much. Amo, really, I never knew what it meant, what you always call him Amo. I just thought it was short for Emery. But certainly we are getting a different perspective tonight.
Quickly though, as
Yes.
you speak of nicknames, did Vance ever give you one?
No. No, but he had a nickname for
For
everybody.
everybody, when he meet me, he says, Zuki, you know. He sounded kind of cute, you know.
I think Vance had a way. I recall going to the U.S. Virgin Islands for a funeral service with him. And I'm going to make a confession tonight as a politician that I am terrible with names. Terrible with names. And it is something that has plagued me all my life. You know, in fact, I spoke to someone some time ago who said that, you know, there was some methodologies that you could develop. But I would know who someone is, but sometimes the name, you know, I just can't bring the name. And I went to a funeral service. I recall it was in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Honorable Vance Emery. And Alexis, I have never in my life seen anything like it. He knew every single individual in St. Thomas, and he knew something about them. So, for example, I recall a gentleman came up and he said to the gentleman, "Boy, you could still play that half drive so good." You know, another fella came up. He said, "Man, how them little spinners, you know, goal." You know, it's as if he had an encyclopedic knowledge and a memory as long as an elephant's in terms of people and individuals. And I think that was part of the knack that he had this, whether you were Zuki or somebody was whatever name he gave them, but he had that knack to make people feel a particular way. And you know what they say sometimes is not what you do, is how you make people feel. Ultimately, that's important. Is there somebody holding? Okay, let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark. Hello?
Good evening, my favorite. How are you?
I am well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just calling to extend sympathy to the people of St. Christopher and Nevis, and these sympathy greetings are coming in from Shauna in Sandy Point.
Thank you so much, Shauna. We truly appreciate your call.
You're most welcome, my favorite.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right. So we have Sandy Point in the house, Shauna expressing her condolences to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. And that too is important because while, of course, Vance was Nevisian, and we claim him proudly as Nevisian, he would have contributed tremendously as well. Of course, he would have spent most of his political career on the opposition benches on St. Kitts. And in 2015, when the party took the decision to be part of Team Unity, he would have gone into government as a senior minister and minister with responsibility for Labour. When in 2020, he would have demitted office and politics, and the Honourable Eric Evelyn would have taken over in that constituency from him. He then became an ambassador and special advisor to the office of the Prime Minister, a position he held as ambassador until his death. But I talk about taking over, Alexis, a bit about the succession, because I think Vance Emery should also be remembered for doing something that is unusual. I don't know if it has ever happened, certainly not that I'm aware, in the history of St. Kitts Nevis, in the sense that a sitting person in office, leader in office, were to carry through a succession plan. And in fact, Vance would have designed this plan, you would recall, because you were part of it, that this is how he wanted to do things, and this is exactly how things happened. And I think that that is interesting.
Well, let's go back to 2013, because myself, you, and the Honourable Vance Emery would have sat and we spoke about the same succession plan, and he did mention that it was time for him to start to exit. So when you hear the talk of pushing out Vance, I want to put that to rest tonight and say that the Honourable Vance Emery in 2013 made it clear what his intentions were then, and he followed through to the end in 2017. And I want to say that I am pleased to be in a party where we would have demonstrated such transparency and such love for party, love for country, so as to ensure that we didn't have any chaos, and that was a smooth transition, in my opinion.
Of course.
And I believe the party has benefited tremendously from that, because of course we went into an election in 2017, December of 2017, and the mandate that was given was a solid one. And so I believe Vance will be proud of us as a party and as a team, continuing on his legacy if he were to be here with us and seeing what's going on. I'm sure up to his passing, he was very proud and pleased with what his party would have become over the last, I would say, 4 years thereabout under your leadership. So that is putting that to rest. And Brantley, you can speak eloquently about your close interaction with Premier Brantley, where you'd have garnered some of the knowledge you have gained in leadership. And I can certainly say that I've traveled with him on a couple of occasions. When we are campaigning for elections, we would go out to the diaspora and campaign. We have gone to Canada, we've gone to the United States, we've gone to St. Martin, the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. He was there with us, he has traveled with us. And, of course, we have always been well received. And simply because Vance himself, as a leader, has always been one to reach out. And all of his exploits here on Nevis would have stretched beyond the shores of St. Kitts and Nevis, so we were always embraced. I recall going to Canada with him, and he was one who was well known wherever he goes.
Of course.
So he was through customs, immigration and customs long before me, because it seemed like they didn't even ask him any questions, but they were questioning me, which is fine. But it was always a pleasure traveling with him, and he would tell you before you leave, get yourself ready, get some thick clothing. We were going out there sometimes in the dead of winter, and he would tell you what to expect and that kind of thing. And Vance, I will say, is someone who all of us, every single one of us in this party, we're indebted to him for what he would have done to guide us through the political process, and even some of the things of life, some of the lessons of life were taught to us by the Honorable Vance Amry. But I think you have some callers holding.
Callers, let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark. Hello?
Yes, good evening.
Yes, caller.
Yeah, I would like to remember Vance as a founding member of the 4th Navy's Boys Brigade.
Caller, are you on a mobile phone or something? There's a terrible feedback we're getting. Hello? Caller?
He may
think we've lost that caller. Caller, please call back in. Sometimes we get this feedback, especially if you use a mobile phone. I think I heard you say that you were talking about the Boys Brigade. So if you can call back in, we would certainly appreciate that. Let's go back to the phones then. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Hi, Mark. Good night.
Good night to you.
And how are you doing?
I am well, thank you.
Yeah, and good night, Alexis.
Good night, sir.
Yeah, Mark, the first time calling into this program, your very popular program for the year 2022. And I really was not looking forward to calling in for this reason. But as the previous caller before, the person who had the issues with the phone, would have said, and rightfully said, sympathy to the whole Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Because we know that we have lost someone who was a very special person, a giant, a statesman. And there, as you mentioned, talking about for the two hours, and that is not even going to start the surface in terms of speaking about him. There's so much that we can say. We can spend the rest of the night and we still will not even complete, who really, my friend really was. But as I said to Mrs. Amry yesterday, we just have to, just enjoy all of the wonderful and experiences we would have had, with her husband and with my friend. I just told her, this is just something that we have to do because we don't have him anymore, and it's not that we will have him again. So whatever time and moment and experiences we had, we just have to cherish and enjoy all of these good times. There's so much that I really can say. Remember coming up to Nevis, for me as a cricket commentator, and my friend even sometimes come to sit with us, and knowing that he would have played the game, have the expertise, and sitting on my left giving expert comments, and what a wonderful time, both of us who, the game that we love so much, which is, one of our passion being cricket and the other being the politics, and both of us would have contributed in whatever way. He rose to the top in Nevis, formed his own party, and would have made a tremendous and outstanding contribution to the upliftment and development and advancement of the people in our country. And I am extremely, extremely proud to have someone and know someone, celebrate, and you name it, with someone who has been, and he was a tremendous person. There's no two ways about it. And as I said, we might have to go and maybe see if we can invent maybe whatever word to describe him, because I don't know if we'll have the true words, but we just have to speak in terms of what we know. And I just have to continue to reflect and the good times and all these wonderful times we would have spent many hours on the phone, me and he, we describing, we explaining, we discussing, the cricket, whether it's the West Indies, whether it's World Cup, you name it. Lots and lots and lots of conversation, and because this is what we love, so much. And I certainly, today, yesterday, I've been just reflecting and these wonderful, wonderful conversation. Then he give the phone to Voni, and then she come back to him, and we just talk, and we just talk, and we just talk. And I'm not very, very happy about this. He's gone, and I'm still a bit hurt. I try to be as strong as possible, being a very strong and positive person, and maybe that's why I'm still keeping up. But I just want to say, to the rest of the family, that we are here with them. We continue to hope that the Lord will be with them on their side, and to continue to keep them strong, and hope that they also would celebrate and remember all the wonderful time that my friend would have given to us on this earth. So I'll just leave it there, Mark,
right,
so everybody can have the little say, because I really have a lot more to say, but I will just leave it there so somebody else can get a time. So you all continue to take care.
Okay, thank you very much. I think a wonderful tribute there of someone who knew the Honorable Van Samry and is calling in. It's almost 9 p.m., ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuned in, you're listening to On the Mark. We're having a very special show tonight, a tribute to the memory of the late, great Vance Winkworth Amry, who left this world last Saturday in the United Kingdom, and who we are seeking through this show tonight to memorialize, a man who has contributed to every facet of development here on the island of Nevis. Let's go back to the phones and say good evening. You're on the mark. No, we've lost that caller. Alexis?
Yes. Early in the week, Premier, there were tributes pouring in from various institutions and different persons, but I single out this one for this particular reason. That is, the Caribbean Development Bank would have sent their tribute. Of course, Vance, being the Minister of Finance and being the financial guru that he was, Vance really would have paid attention to paying his bills, or all bills. And I'm pointing out that because I know we would have had a relationship with the Caribbean Development Bank, the Caribbean Development Fund, with the Kuwaiti Fund as well, which was an important relationship, and indeed other institutions like local banks and so forth. He believed in paying his bills, and he believed in honoring that commitment to the various financial institutions with whom the NIA did business. And why I bring that up is because I remember when we got back into government, the monies owed to the Kuwaiti Fund was not being paid throughout the years 2006 to 2013. We would have run into difficulties as an island, meaning we lost that privileged relationship. And Vance Amry went about re-establishing that relationship to pay up the arrears, pay up whatever was owing to to ensure that we can get back in good standing. Of course, things would have changed up to that point in time, because once you lose that relationship, it's difficult to rekindle it to some extent. But the facility over here at Long Point, that was built out of monies borrowed from the Kuwaiti Fund. Also down there at the expansion of the Charlestown waterfront, those were monies. Of course, when we bought that first Watsilla engine, those were funds that were borrowed from the Caribbean Development Bank. And indeed, other institutions, there was a international or an arm of the Taiwanese government that loaned monies to the NIA as well. So Vance would have borrowed, yes, but he was always prepared to pay. And those are some of the difficult fiscal position we found this island in 2013, as I made reference to that earlier. But I'm being more specific now in terms of the difficulties of, mending these relationships and ensuring that we get back on track in paying these bills. And, of course, the NRP can refute as much as they want, but the facts are always a stubborn thing, but the facts are what they are, and you cannot get away from the facts. And that is why I commend Vance, and that is why even in my position as the minister responsible for housing and land, for example, we have tremendous difficulties there financially. But I've always said to the manager there and the persons who pay the bills there, pay your bills. And we have been paying bills from funds that I don't even know where it comes from sometimes, but at least that is a principle that we have inherited from Vance Amri, that you have to pay your bills, because that relationship, you'll need it in the future and for future occasions. And that is why I believe we're beneficiary at this point in time of some of the the positive things that we are deriving from such thinking and such action. So I just wanted to put that on the table. That Vance Amri was one who always believed in paying his bills, paying the countries or the islands' bills, and managing the resources in a way so that you can always be in a position to do so.
But that, I think, is all part of being responsible. And that's one word we could always use to describe him, somebody who's responsible. I was just sent this message from Melvina O'Dane in Texas. She says, I'm expressing my condolences to the entire family circle of my friend, Vance Amri, to the people of our federation and those in the diaspora. May he rest in peace and rise in power. Are there somebody, other people holding? Let's go back to the phones then. Good evening, you're on the mark. Okay, we're not getting, ladies and gentlemen, please be patient with us. 469-1616. Let's take this call. Good evening, you're on the mark. Something seems to be wrong all of a sudden. I don't understand what it is. Again, the numbers to call are 869-469-1616 and 869-469-1700. We're getting the calls in earlier. We seem to be having some difficulties now. Let's try again. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening, Prem.
Good evening.
And Deputy Prem.
Good evening, sir.
How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Hello?
Yes, go ahead. We're listening to you.
I'm calling to just to give my tribute to the late Vance Amri, our colleague and friend. And I found a poem here by Henry Longfellow, which says, lives of great men oft remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. I think that Vance has left many footprints for all of us to follow, be it in sports, education, government, and leadership. Mr. M was a calm and cool and collective person who always showed concern for others. He made time to interact with all persons from every walk of life. He was never too busy to stop and give a word of advice. He was very courageous, and I say this against the backdrop that in 2006, when we lost the election, I remember clearly he called me and said, organize a meeting for the Saturday. We lost the election. It was the Monday before. I mean, I thought that he was crazy. Of course, I didn't tell him that. But I suggested we do it 2 weeks from now. He said no. The meeting will start the campaign to win back the government. He knew exactly what he wanted. And that meeting kicked off 5 years of campaigning, and we eventually won back the government. And I consider him a friend. And his passing has come as a complete shock. I struggled with the news, and I wish that it was fake news, but alas, it was the truth. We have lost a giant, and his passing should, among other things, cause all of us to think of our own mortality and wise up and prepare ourselves. I just want to give condolences to his wife and his family and the entire Nevis public. He has served us well, and I pray that God may grant him his peace, grant you his peace in this time of sorrow. And I just want to quote one verse of scripture here. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 1 says, "For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, and house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." May Vance rest in eternal peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And Premier, if I may quickly, that sounds like our CAPSEC trust.
Yes.
Yes, and he mentioned Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Henry Longfellow also had a quotation, "The heights of great men." You might want to finish with me, but the heights of great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards in the night. That's Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And that is a quotation that you can apply to the Honorable Vance Emery, because he would have attained certain heights in this country and throughout the region, and at least he would have done so through hard work, through diligence, and through the perseverance and persistency that we know he was certainly. Those were his characteristics. Sorry, yeah.
Well, you are absolutely correct. I think hard work, one thing we can say. And I thought that story, it's interesting when you start to talk about someone's life. You get stories that you weren't aware of, because I was not aware that after that loss in 2006 that a meeting, a public rally was arranged just the week after, and I thank Truss for that. And as he said, that Vance was determined to win back the government, which we eventually did in 2013. We were delayed but not denied to correct course and get back into government, and that I think is critically important as we continue to make efforts in that regard. Now, we have been opening the lines and asking for persons to call in who would wish to share memories and share tributes of the Honorable Vance Winkworth Emery, who would have passed away just last Saturday. He was the second and, how should I say, the second and fourth?
Second and
Premier of Nevis, because he was the second Premier, and then of course he would have come back. No, Joseph Perry was the third. So he would have come back for a second term. And even that, I think that's remarkable, because most people, once they lose, that's it. But he was able to come back, and I think that speaks volumes, and so would have done 20 years, which makes him the longest serving Premier that we would have had here on the island of Nevis. We have been joined, ladies and gentlemen, by the Honorable Troy Liburd, who is a junior minister having responsibility in the Cabinet for Education and Information. He is here with us now in the studio, and we say good evening to you, the Honorable Troy Liburd, and welcome to this very special show, a tribute to the Honorable Vance Winkworth Emery. You would have worked with the Honorable Vance Emery. In fact, you would have come into the Cabinet as a youngster back in 2013 under his leadership, and so we are very, very grateful that you would have made the time to come here on this very sad but important occasion as we memorialize this giant of a man.
Good evening, Mark. Good evening, Alexis, and good evening to everybody out there in Radio Land, or if you're viewing on YouTube or Facebook. It's very nice to be here this evening. I wanted to come in person, of course, because it is one of those occasions. Last week, Saturday morning, I got a call that awoke me from my sleep about 4 a.m. in the morning, and the person said that Vance Amory had passed away, and I think I took about maybe a minute to gather myself, and then I asked the person, what you're talking about? Because it was something that was totally unexpected for me. It was a big shocker, because Vance is somebody we always looked at and said that even though he was advancing in age, that he was always looking very, very youthful. So came as a big surprise to me, and certainly heartbreaking. And I want to, of course, send out condolences to his children and his grandchildren, his siblings, and all those who loved Vance Amory. I think Vance Amory, you can certainly associate the word love with him, because a lot of people really, really felt that type of connection with him. Vance Amory was the type of person, no matter how big he got in life, because he got to the position where he was a premier and so on, and then a federal minister, and he was somebody who was well known all around the Caribbean, and even further afield he was well known, because once he goes someplace, he has that type of personality that people gravitate to. So no matter how big of a person he got, he never lost that touch, that genuine touch, where he could meet somebody for the first time and you felt like it was somebody who you knew. I remember as a youngster growing up, and my formative years growing up, my growing years, Vance Amory was premier of Nevis for most of those, from a youngster up to my teenage years and so on. As you rightfully said, he would have spent 14 years in government in the first instance, and then in 2013 would have gone back for another 5-year term as premier. Luckily for someone like me, I had the opportunity to be a part of the government with both of you gentlemen, led by the Honorable Vance Amory, and you can't put a price on experience. You get to be there, and you get to grow and learn, and being around somebody like the Honorable Vance Amory is certainly a good experience. You learn a lot of things from him. And one of the things that you had to sit and marvel at was the way that he remained poised and calm under any type of pressure. It doesn't matter how much or how tough the situation looks. Vance is somebody who kept a straight face and didn't show too much emotion, and he always remained poised and calm and so on. And I think he's somebody who the Nevision public and the Federation at large that we're really, really going to miss. He has had a big impact. When the history of St. Kitts and Nevis is written, whoever the historians are who are going to put it down on paper, there'll be a lot to say about Vance Amory. He was a giant of a man.
I think that, Joy, thank you for that. But I think that's the aspect of it which to me is really so incredible. The fact that if you're going to talk about athletics, you have to mention Vance. You're going to talk about football, you have to mention him. If you talk about cricket, you have to mention him. Banking, teaching, civil service, education, prominent secretaries, political parties. He was, it seems, involved in so much.
The church.
Yeah, the church. Many of us, as somebody called in earlier, we couldn't get the gist of what you were saying because of phone problem. We were talking about the Boys Brigade. Many of us, I think, might be remembered for doing one thing. So you say, oh, somebody was a good cricketer, or somebody was a good lawyer, or that person was a good doctor. But there's so many aspects to this one individual, and so many things. We haven't even touched on his family life, that he would have raised 2 beautiful daughters, and would have lived a particular type of life. And we when we look at this, you sort of get this sense that this was a complete package. As somebody who everything he touched and worked at was clearly brought benefit. The 3 of us is perhaps fortuitous that the 3 of us are here, because in every way the 3 of us are really where we are now because of that same foundation, and for Vance bringing us in, because ultimately you are sitting in a cabinet because he as premier agreed. that you would be in that cabinet and were given an opportunity as a very young individual to serve in that capacity. So I think that is important. Do we have somebody holding? Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark. Okay, caller, please call right back in 869-469-1616 or 869-469-1700. Let's go again. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening, Mr. Premier.
Good evening.
Good evening, Alexis. Good evening, Troy.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, I'm just calling in to lend my support and to pay my little tribute as well. I have to say that it has been a very difficult past couple of days. When I got the call that woke me up on Saturday morning, minutes before, I couldn't describe the feeling. And for part of the rest of the day, I had a headache. It's been a rough couple of days. And I went to St. Kitts yesterday for a meeting, and it didn't get any better because when I entered the office, that is an office that I inherited from him, that government headquarters. So I went there, and one of the ladies from my department came in and she said, "Mr. Evelyn, you look like you're in a mess." I said, well, I had to remind her, this is the office that Mr. Amri sat in. And, so when I went in there and I sat in the chair and I was looking around the office, Vance just came back, And so it has been difficult, and of course everybody knows that I'm the one who would have succeeded him in St. George, Gingerland, and so it has been a rough time, And of course, we in Gingerland, we really feel it hard. Well, it's of course all of us in Nevis and the Federation and throughout the region. But it has really been a rough time, And of course, we have heard so much about Mr. Amri. And whether people liked him or not, everything that is being said is the truth and is fact. And so we cannot dispel what is being said about Mr. Amri. I really want to endorse all of what Stedman Trost said a while ago, and of course what Troy said a while ago as well, because we've heard so much about Mr. Amri, right? But what I just wanted to focus on tonight, I just wanted to focus on the fact that, he would have risen to the pinnacle of life as the Premier of Nevis. He would have been in every facet of the community. Head teacher, banker, Premier, senior member in the federal cabinet, ambassador, cricketer. He was in everything. He touched so many lives. But irrespective of what he did, the position he rose to, he never, ever lost the common touch. His humility is one that stood out practically for everyone. And everyone who he came into contact with could attest to the fact that this gentleman who walked the streets of Nevis and St. Kitts and throughout the region, he was just so humble. And, in Gingerland, he attended practically every function. And every function that he went to, at the end of the function, he would want to greet practically everybody. And it is not just greeting people, but he will inquire about the family members, inquire about the village, inquire about the community. And so it was not just a greet. It was a greet and then to ask about the well-being of people. And so he cared so deeply for people. The humility of this man is, I just can't find a word to describe it. But, even when I went to the funeral this afternoon, I was there saying to myself, large funeral, when Vans go to these kind of funerals, he want to greet everybody. He want to shake everybody's hand. He want to give everybody a hug. When he go to a graduation ceremony, it's the same thing. Any function he goes to, when he goes to a cricket match, he wants to greet everybody. And always had that charming smile that won so many people's hearts. So I wanted primarily to focus on that humility And the fact that as a politician, as a premier, he never, ever lost that common touch. And always had that calm demeanor. I mean, somebody was asking me the other day if he ever got upset. Did he ever got upset? I've never, the person said, I've never seen him upset. You know? And he's the one who could always calm the waters. He come to a conversation, people might be saying something bad about him, and all Vance needed to do was to pat the person on the shoulder and calm the person right down. Calm the person right down. And as Alexis mentioned earlier, he loved to call people by their nicknames because, I mean, wherever Vance saw me, he was always one of my nicknames he called me. I don't think he ever called me Eric. He knew my nickname, one of my nicknames, and everywhere he saw me, it doesn't matter what function is at, that's the nickname I was getting. And of course I embraced that. And then of late he started to call me Mr. Mayor as well. And of course, you know, he goes to the same church with me. And every Sunday when he comes to church, very, very, very involved. And irrespective, even when he was the premier, he remained very involved in the church. Very involved in the church. And I believe it's that grounding that he had in the church that made him such a wonderful person that stood out. He just stood out. And I've had a wonderful relationship with him many years. Every time we meet, it was always a pleasant meeting, always a pleasant conversation, you know. And so, as I said, it has really been a rough time because, as I said, I mean, as the person who would have succeeded him in Gingerland, it really hurt. It really hurt. And I know the people of Gingerland are hurting as well. All of us are hurting. And I want to extend heartfelt condolences to his wife, Bernie, to the children, to the grandchildren, to the siblings, especially Meredith and Hugh, and all of his relatives, all of his friends, all of St. Kitts and Nevis. I mean, we have really, really lost someone whose void can never be filled. Because ever since I got on the political scene, I've said numerous times, and I will continue to say, that I can never, in my wildest dreams, fill the void, could never walk in Van's shoes. His shoes are very difficult to fill, and I will never be able to, no matter how I try, be able to fill the shoes of the Honorable Van Camry. And so I want to say on behalf of all of us in Gingerland, to the entire family, we wish you God's speed, God's grace and mercy. Hope He will enfold you. I know it's a very, very, very difficult time at this time. And so it's a difficult time for all of us, but God will see us through. And if He was alive, if He was around, that is what He would have wanted us to do. He would have wanted to put our trust in God, you know. And every time I go to church, I'm going to remember Him. We're going to remember Him. Always up in the sanctuary, coming down with the minister to administer communion. Always had a smile, always so pleasant. And as I said, that humility, that common touch. And one of the things that stood out about Vance as well, that as a politician, you don't have to build 10 buildings. You don't have to fix 50 roads. Once you know how to deal with people, once you know how to connect with people, that was his magic. Once you know how to deal with people, the people are going to be for you. And so it has been my pleasure calling in to give this little tribute. There's so much more that can be said, but I know more people would want to call in, but I absolutely could not allow this opportunity to pass by without calling in and giving my little tribute and extending my heartfelt and deepest condolences to all who are left to mourn, which includes all of us in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and may his soul rest in eternal peace. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, the Honorable Eric Evelyn, who has just paid a very emotional tribute to the late, great Vance Winkworth Amry. We continue to take your calls on 869-469-1616 and 1700. Let's go right back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening to you, Mark. Good evening to you, Zoop.
Yes. Good evening.
Pretty sure you can recognize the voice. Anyway, I'm calling from New York. On behalf of Nigerians in America, Tony Sadio, Eustace Huggins, Booms, Piper, and Twiller. I want to extend my condolences to the Reds. From all of us over here, for the things he have done for us. And I remember 2 years ago when we called him, when we were honoring Sadio and Huggins, and he was here in a heartbeat. Couldn't get a better guy to do such for us. So I just want to say my condolences to the Rev and his family for all he has done for us. May God bless him and the rest of his family, and to you too, and all the Nevis. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We continue to take your calls. We're paying tribute to the Honorable Vance Winkworth Amry. With me in the studio, the Honorable Alexis Jeffers, Deputy Premier of Nevis, Deputy Leader of the Concerned Citizens Movement, and the Honorable Youthant Troy Liebert, Junior Minister, member in the Cabinet, who would have served under the Honorable Vance Amry and now continues to serve the people of Nevis in this new Cabinet as well. We continue to take your calls and go straight back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening, Mr. Brantley. I'd like to recite a few words that I penned about Mr. Amry since his passing. It's entitled The Legacy of Vance Amry. Saturday, April 2nd, 2022, Nevisians woke up to learn the sad news that our statesman, Ambassador Vance Amry, had transitioned into eternity after a short illness, were the views. The news spread like wildfire over hill and dale, shocked the citizens, residents, and those in the diaspora like a mighty gale. Prime Minister Timothy Harris soon confirmed the fact. He did it reflecting on our statesman's tact, described as a very astute politician, a man with charisma who served St. Kitts and Nevis with distinction. His personality was one that was filled with charm. To everyone he was so warm. His voice of authority commanded respect. Though quiet, even when angry, some found it hard to detect. He founded and led the Concerned Citizens Movement, serving 2 terms as Premier with patriotic intent. According to the Observer newspaper, his last caption called for quiet diplomacy that implied peace to our nation as he ended his earthly journey. Yes, Ambassador His Excellency Vance W. Amry has left us a wealth of history. Of humble birth from New Orleans, he has traveled the world over. That's my memory. His mark on the Federation is indelible, a partnership to the political scene which was invaluable. Scholar, educator, banker, family man and premier, church server, cricketer, politician and ambassador. Nevis' second premier was one of a kind, humble. He has left a great legacy behind. As a retired past teacher, I would like to extend sincere condolences to his family and the entire population. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Ramidita Elliott. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Ms. Elliott, well penned. I know you are a phenomenal writer, so I am not surprised. I was trying all along to try and determine the voice. And when you said it, I said, of course, I should have known the voice from earlier. But thank you very much. I think that is something, that type of tribute, that really should be memorialized for all time. Truly a wonderful tribute to the Honorable Vance Winkworth Amory. We continue to take your calls on 869-469-1616 and 1700, and we go straight back to the phones. Good evening, it's 9:30, and we're paying tribute to the Honorable Vance Amory.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Brantley.
Good evening to you.
And good evening to Mr. Troy and Mr. Jeffers.
Good evening, sir.
Yes,
Good
evening. I too want to send condolences to Mr. Vance Amory's family and the whole Federation. Mr. Amory has touched my life in a very particular way, and I really want to mention it. In 2011, I lost my daughter at the age of 3. And while we were mourning and in that funeral service at the church, when I looked out, who I saw, Mr. Vance Amory. I am no popular person, I'm just a humble, simple little non-national guy. But Mr. Vance Amory take the time out to come and support my family at the funeral, and that said something about the man.
Yes.
That said something about the man. I am no popular person, I'm just a simple non-national guy, just in this, trying to make out. And I got the support from there's something about that man that, as I heard a caller said earlier, you need to create a word to describe Mr. Henry. So let me just say to the whole world who is listening, we have lost a giant, and may his soul rest in peace.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and I think that speaks eloquently. The gentleman described himself in a particular way, but suggesting that the Premier of Nevis was not too mighty, not too powerful, not too anything, but rather would have come to mourn with him in a difficult period. And it goes back to what I said about people remembering how you treat them. Really, ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Not how many buildings you build or roads you build, but how you treat people. And we must never lose sight of the fact that that is really what politics is about, and what humanity and living is about. It's how you treat people. That's really critical. Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Yeah, good evening. First, I'd like to say sincerest condolences to the family and friends of the late Vance Amory. And I just try to look at a couple of things that I remember about him. Was our teacher at the Charleston Secondary School in the early 1970s and also the mid-1970s. He was also a manager and player of the champion Gingerland Jets football team back in the mid-70s. Some people might remember that team. He was also the first division to play for our West Indies team, not necessarily the West Indies test team, but the first to play for our West Indies team, the President 11. Way back, I think it was in 1971, and should have made the West Indies senior team, actually. He was our transport provider to and from cricket and football matches, and from when we had road relays, he transported us. He would accommodate us at his house after practice sessions, especially down at Ball Pasture or the Nigeria Recreation Ground. He was the first person to give me an insight into university life and inspired me to attend university, actually. He was willing to assist whenever and wherever he could. And he showed you that you could successfully make academics and sports. He was a mentor to many persons. R.I.P. Vance Amory, you will be missed sorely here in Nevis and the Greater Federation and the wider Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And I did not even know about the football. I knew he was a footballer, but here we are hearing that he was the captain of the champion football team. Jets, I think he said. And so it is quite instructive. Do we have anybody else holding? Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark. Hello?
Yeah, good evening, Quad. Good evening, Duke.
Yes. Good evening.
Duke. Good evening, the young General Chai. And
Good evening.
You're missing the Colonel tonight, the Honorable Vance Amory. I just want to talk about some memories of him. I could remember back in the days me and my uncle had some issue, and I passed him, and I didn't really speak to my uncle, and Ammi was there, and Ammi pulled me right back and said, boy, you have to say good morning to your uncle, as well as me and talk to you again. And I have to end up doing it. And I can remember in 2002, when we were over at Hard-Time Grounds, when me and him and a few guys was having pickaxe, digging out stone to make the pitch. Everybody was passing and making noise and saying, oh, what am we doing out there digging out stone to make pitch? And that was the whole mark of the man. He wanted the cricket game to play. And also, he was a very good hand tennis player. We used to play hand tennis over on the corridor over at Gingerland Secondary School. That after we don't practice him. And he was just a good man. He's a man that helped, but he don't want his name to call. And that was the whole mark of the man. He have lived a life exemplary, and he have lived a life dedicated to both St. Kitts and Nevis, and may his soul rest in peace.
Brother Paul, we have been joined by the Honorable Spencer Brand, who I know was trying valiantly to call in and couldn't get in, and so came all the way over to the studio because of the COVID-19 protocols and restrictions. The Honorable Troy Livett has stepped out to allow the Honorable Spencer Brand to take his chair. We don't want to say take your seat, because that has its own connotation, so take your chair. So Spencer Brand, welcome to this special show and special tribute to the Honorable Van Sambry.
Good evening, Mr. Premier, and good evening, Deputy Premier. You are absolutely correct. I've been trying to get in now for over an hour, but I felt that it was extremely important for me to be here to lend my voice to the individual whom we are celebrating this edition of On the Map. I want to, from the outset, take this opportunity to offer my sincere condolences, certainly on behalf of my wife and my family, to the wife of the Honorable Van Sambry, his children, his immediate family, on this tragic loss of what I call an icon, really. Former Premier and I had a nickname for each other. We call each other Parson because of our involvement in the church, in the Anglican Church. But I remember after the 2006 elections, I received a telephone call from one Livingston Herbert, inviting me to a meeting at the conch shell where the Concerned Citizen Movement Party often had their executive meeting. And I would have met there with the hierarchy, so to speak, of the Concerned Citizen Movement Party. And I would say the rest is history. After that meeting, the Premier then, the party leader then, Van Sambry, would have pulled me aside and let's give me a very brief sentence: prepare yourself. That's all he said to me. Prepare yourself that evening. And I would have had many what I call life altering experiences with him. I think both of you gentlemen would have been on some of those. One also would have been after the 2011 elections, when we had that meeting there at our office on Government Road, when the person in charge of the police force on the island of Nevis would have reported to us then in that meeting that all of the ballots were being asked to be sent over to St. Kitts urgently. And you know, former Premier in his own quiet, I said, okay, just carry out the instruction. We all know that an election petition took place after that election. And again, the rest is history. I believe that Van Sambry was someone who was very easy to follow as a leader. Extremely easy to follow as a leader. He not only talked the talk, but he also walked the walk. He led by example, and he was one who was able to give clear instructions and also give instructions that he himself followed. So I had to come and lend my voice to the Honorable Vance Winkworth Amry. Much has been said about him, and I believe that much more would be said about him. I believe that the island of Nevis and the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis would have lost one of their most favorite sons, one of their most loved sons, and I believe that he would have rightfully claimed that accolade because of just how he lived, just how he interacted with people, and just the example that he set. And I believe that while we remember him, we must also take some examples from him. The way in which that he tried to interact with people, the way in which he tried to live his life, and the good example that he set for us to follow. I believe that Nevis and the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis are a better place because of Vance Winkworth Amory, and I believe that I am certain that history would be kind to him, and when the pages of history is written in time to come, I believe that more than one chapter will be there for the Honorable Vance Amory. So once again, I want to offer my condolences. I want to say to the family that we are with you. The whole of Nevis is with you. The whole of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis is with you. And we mourn together as a nation. We mourn together as a family in remembrance of one of our greatest sons.
Well, thank you for that, the Honorable Spencer Brand. Very, very moving. I don't know if I can call you Parson, but certainly that was your nickname. I feel left out. I didn't have a nickname at all. But what I will say is that I've been checking my phone, and I apologize to viewers who see me checking my phone. It's because messages keep coming in. One young man sent me a song he said he wanted played, and I had to explain that I couldn't do it quite like that. He would have had to come earlier, and we play it through the system here. But this from my dear friend Cecil Shark Farrell in the VI. He has just sent a message to say he was a member of the football team Gingerland Jets. He was the goalkeeper. So clearly, so many people have memories of Vance Amory and were able to connect with him. You're talking about the politics, and I won't get into the names, but I was at a barber shop, I remember some time ago, and a particular, my dear friend, good friend of mine, grew up with him. He was there, and he was bowling off a long run, as we would say, and saying some unkind things about Vance Amory. And the fellas reminded him that when he was saying some unkind things, Vance only came and pinched his cheek and said to him, call him by his father's name. I said, oh, what's going on with you? And they say he melted like butter, you know. And I always laugh at that memory, because I always, you know, sometimes fellas feel hard and tough, you know, but he had that ability to just relax people. And as I said, this uncanny ability to zero in on something. I remember when we had a really wonderful, and that's what I'm happy about. We had a really wonderful tribute, if you recall, at NEPAC, when he left active politics.
Yes.
And I want to thank Rodney Elliott, because she was instrumental in organizing that. And different speakers spoke. I was given the opportunity. I think, Alexis, you as well. Spencer, did you speak on that occasion? But I think several people spoke there. And I made the point that Vance's style sometimes reminded me of the biblical story about when the ship was sailing and the storms were raging, and the servants of God wondered, well, how could Jesus be so calm and sleeping with the seas raging? And he was calm and sleeping because he understood, and he you know, that not panicking in times of trouble and times of difficulty, and remaining calm, that was clearly very important. And in the turbulent times, I think, that we encountered during that 2006-2013 period, and even during the secession period, when of course times are also tough and difficult, I believe that the Honorable Vance Amory would really, that calm demeanor. At my age, I still haven't accomplished it yet. I still haven't achieved it. I don't know if I ever will, because persons have different you know, approaches and a different makeup. But I think that sometimes that was perhaps mistaken by others as, you know, maybe that he doesn't want confrontation, or he's not brave, or he's not strong. But I think they would have been making a mistake if they thought that it was just that was his way of dealing with situations, and always would have a calm voice. I have never really seen him raise his voice, although I've seen him angry on occasions. He's always had this calmness about him. It is 1:15. Do we have anybody holding? Let's go back to the phones. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Hi, good evening to Premier Brantley.
Good evening.
Deputy Premier Jeffers, and also Junior Minister Libert. I too would like to join with the other callers and send out condolences to Mr. Amory's family and also to the people in the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis, and nationals and non-nationals. Mr. Amory, in my view, was a very humble, peaceful and kind gentleman. I first came into contact with him at a funeral in St. Kitts at the Gardens, Plainfield, for the late Tamboa Kitwana. May his soul continue to rest in peace. That's the same guy who was a former band member, I think was Element and the Jazz Band.
Yes.
The guy who sang I Want to Sweet Me Coffee. And he also used to host Under the Banyan Tree.
Yes.
So, you know, when Mr. Amory came, I did not even know he was in the audience until when I saw him, because, you know, he ain't that kind of person who want a lot of flourish, and, you know, if it was somebody else, you know, that would want everybody to know that they're there, you know. And also, I met him again at a fast food place in St. Kitts called Uncle T's. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it.
Yeah, that's on Cairn
Some
Street.
nice chicken and chips and hot dogs and hamburgers and so forth. So one evening I went in there and I said, I saw Mr. Amory. I met him in there, as a matter of fact. And I said, Mr. Amory, as a joker, what are you doing in here? I thought you would be over Marshall. He said, no. When I come to St. Kitts, I always come here. So that just to show you, you know, even though he might have had a little money, you know, he still patronizes small businesses. And Mr. Terrence Alvin, that's the owner, he said, no, when he come here, when he come to St. Kitts, he always come there. So you see, he wasn't lying at all. And I would also like to tell the lady with the poem, it was lovely, well put together. Continue to enjoy the rest of the night, get home safely.
Well said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, and we certainly appreciate that. And the tributes have been pouring into the Honorable Vance Amory, who has passed on at the age of 72. We got the news on Saturday the 2nd of April. Still a young man, but his contribution is being remembered tonight. And I want to thank my cabinet colleagues who have come, the Honourable Alexis Jeffers, our Deputy Premier and Deputy Leader of the party, the Honourable Troy Liebert, the Honourable Spencer Brand, who have all been able to come to the studio and to chime in. And of course, the Cabinet Secretary, Stedman Truss, who at one point was the party chair, and he too has called in. We're going to stick with the phones and take as many more calls as we can. Good evening, you're on the mark.
Good evening, Prem.
Good evening.
Good evening to the cabinet colleagues there. Here's Brandy Williams.
Good evening.
I've been trying all evening to get it, but I'm here now.
Yes.
I too would want to lend my voice in sending condolences to the family of Vance W. Amory, to his wife, Vernie, his daughters, his siblings, especially Meredith, and all the other family members, as well as to the St. Kitts and Nevis citizenry and the diaspora, all those who he would have touched in different ways. For me, the journey with Vance Amory started from as a very young girl. He became a household name in that himself and my older brother Rupert Vigo, they call him Parson, they were raised by an Anglican minister at the St. James's Anglican Church. And so our yard, our home, became a respite for him from time to time. And so he would have helped in molding me from a very early age. Moving forward, he would always inquire as to what I was doing with my life. And so he was a staple in my life. I could remember two significant dates in particular where he made, helped me to make decisions. One in 2002 when I received the Chevening scholarship, he asked me, what am I going to do? And I said, I didn't quite make up my mind. And he said to me, do something in offshore financial services. At that time, the financial industry was booming in Nevis, but at the same time, we were blacklisted by the major giants, the OECD and the FATF and all that. And he said, do something in that area. And I ended up, using my scholarship to study something in the offshore financial services. The disenfranchisement of developing states, and I used Nevis as a case study. And that, for me, was a pivotal time in moment in my life, because my study was used for various restaurants, because it was one of the first that was done at that time. And then fast forward to 2011, I received some training from the Caribbean Institute for Women in Leadership. And subsequent to the training, he met me a few Saturdays going back and forth from St. Kitts when we were starting the St. Kitts Nevis chapter. And he inquired of me what I was doing. And I said I was trying to get this association up and running. And, we spoke. And he said, this is a good thing. I always had my eye on you at that level. But now that you have taken the initiative to start, I could only push you from here on in. And in 2013, he invited me to sit at the table with him when we won the election. There's so much that could be said about Vance, and I cannot go into it, because I think, for one, I'll get emotional, and two, persons have been saying the same thing. But for me, I would have learned quite a bit. He would have said to me, in everything you do, try to help people, number one. Try to be true to your word, number two. And most importantly, listen. Give persons a listening ear. Sometimes you cannot help them financially or otherwise, but just sitting and listening to their problems, sometimes, most cases, would help persons. So I just want to say that Vance would have left a legacy for us to follow. He would have built a strong foundation on which we are to continue to build. And coming out of his passing is, a number of lessons for us to learn. And we could only try to emulate the good things that he would have done going forward. So once again, to all those who mourn, I want to say condolences, and may his soul rest in perpetual peace and rise in glory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very well said. That's the Honorable Hazel Brandy Williams, also a member of Cabinet, junior minister in the Ministry of Health and Gender, and she too would have been brought into the Cabinet, as she said, by the Honorable Vance Amory. He would have brought her in as, I believe, a nod to women, and he would have brought in the Honorable Troy Livett as a nod to youth. Alexis, you and I were a little over the hill already by then, so certainly he would have done that. And that again speaks to who he was really, and what he sought to do. And I like the sharing by Hazel, of course, about how he would have influenced her and impacted her own life. And I think that many people out there would have, no doubt, similar stories about how he would have impacted them in some way, shape, or form. Honorable Alexis Jeffers, they were run out of time, so yeah. I can give you an opportunity to perhaps make a final comment.
Sure. What I would like to touch on quickly, though, is the fact that with all that is being said, one has to say that Vance Amory was a good manager of time, because all that we're hearing that he has accomplished, or he would have accomplished over his time here on earth, was all done within the time frame of 72 years, within a 24-hour period, a 7-day week, a 7 days a week thing, or 31 days a month, for example. But he would have done a great deal here on earth, and he would have left a legacy behind that all of us can emulate. I want to repeat once again that he would have built his life on some principles that we all can certainly embrace. Love for fellow men, honesty, decency, transparency, tell the truth at all times, and also once these attributes are adhered to, then of course we can tell ourselves that we are walking in his footsteps. And it is a night that I believe all of us can be proud of, even though it is under trying circumstances, because all of us would have had a chance to impart some of the teachings of Vance Amory and some of the influences that we would have gotten from him. And indeed, the entire Nivision public, Kittitian public, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and beyond, can certainly be proud of a son of the soil who would have come to this earth. And, well, obviously he came, he made his mark, he has exited this world, but he has left something behind for all of us. And in closing, I want to just once again wish the entire Nivision community, his family, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and all who would have known him, I want to express once again my profound sympathies on the passing of the Honorable Vance Amory. And knowing that he is in a better place, of course, and knowing at this point in time that we'll try our endeavor best as a party, as a team, and as a government to live out that legacy so that this island and this country can be made much better than what it is as a result of his influence and his teaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Spencer Brand, a final word from you.
Yes, Pim, thank you very much. I had a conversation just yesterday with Sadio there in New York, and I believe he's listening. Good evening, Sadio. And he said to me in 1992, when Dr. Simeon lost the government to Vance Amory, he said that Dr. Simeon Daniel would have called him and said to him that we now have a new premier in Nevis, and I want you to give him the same courtesy that you offered me. And Sadio said, you know, he would have heard about Vance, he would have known Vance as a youth growing up, but when he actually met him in New York and showed him around New York, he said that Vance had a lot of great ideas and wonderful ideas for the island of Nevis. I believe that, in my mind, that his premiership would have been transformative for the island of Nevis. And I think that Sadio testimony, and like others, would have seen the kind of works and transformation that Vance under his leadership would have done for the island of Nevis. Like I said earlier, he was an easy leader to follow. And I think that his leadership left a lot for us to emulate. And I think that while we remember him and while we celebrate him, we all can look at the kind of legacy that he would have left for us with this great CCM party, I believe. And I think that while we celebrate him and move forward, we can look to the future with great things, bearing in mind the legacy that he would have left. And I want to say to his family once again how saddened we are. Their loss is our loss. Their loss is the people of St. Kitts and Nevis' loss. And we hope that while we reflect and while we ponder and while we look to the future, we would know that he came, he served, he did his bit, and now he would have gone on to meet his maker. And I believe that as a people, we all can take a chapter out of his life, because his life was a good one.
That was the Honourable Spencer Brand. Thank you very much. I want to say thank you to the Honourable Alexis Jeffers, who's been with me for the 2 hours. The Honourable Spencer Brand, who would have come in because he couldn't get in on the radio. The Honourable Troy Liebert, who spent some time with us as well. The Honourable Hazel Brandy Williams, who called in. The Honourable Cabinet Secretary Stedman Truss, who also called in. All of whom, and the Honourable Eric Evelyn, how could I forget the Mayor, who also would have called in, all of whom had a special story to tell. And I believe that there are thousands of stories like that out there, people at home, people in the diaspora, people across the Caribbean region, friends and family in St. Kitts and all over. And I was especially pleased that people have been messaging me. I had some messages from the U.S. Virgin Islands saying they were trying to get in, but they couldn't get in either. So I want to again thank people like Cecil Shark, Farrell Smithy there in the St. John's in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and of course those who call in from New York, the various associations. And I think that it speaks volumes to the Honourable Simeon Daniel saying to Sadio, listen, lend the same support. And I think that is what we need to do here, to see orderly transition, allow the democratic process to work, and to have leaders that can be magnanimous in terms of how we approach life and how we approach each other. Ladies and gentlemen, it means we have to go. Whenever the band strikes up, that's our cue. I want to thank again all of those who would have called, all of those who would have contributed and made this show really something special in memoriam. The Honorable Vance Winkworth Amory, who passed away on the 2nd of April 2022 at the age of 72. May his soul rest in eternal peace. Thank you, good night, and God bless you.
Good night.
The views and opinions expressed on the preceding program were solely those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Nevis Broadcasting Company Limited or its advertisers.